So bringing all of these functions together under one marketing leader was a big change. It allowed us to start at the beginning, right? What are consumer insights telling us? What does that mean for unmet needs? How do we develop a roadmap that meets those consumers' needs through new products? And then bringing creative, brand, and paid media alongside so that we could develop campaigns across the funnel that reached consumers where they were passionate about these products and finding solutions.
I'm Eric Fulwiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
Hey everyone, my guest today is Molly Landman. She is the CMO of Petsafe, which, as you will hear, is one of the biggest brands that you have probably never heard of in a massive category. I pulled a stat here that says that the pet industry is poised to swell to $500 billion by 2030. So there's a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of change, as you will hear Molly talk about at the beginning. Molly's background, a lot of great, solid experience within the world of consumer packaged goods, retail, e-commerce. She was at Unilever for 10 years, led global and U.S. marketing for major beauty brands. And, as you know, having heard me interview a lot of people that come from the CPG world, just the commercial fundamentals that she has and how she applied that to some of the decisions that she had to make in the early days as the first CMO of Petsafe, which is also something that we talk about. So really interesting conversation, a very big business that's been around for a while that's really having to reinvent themselves, challenge themselves as a lot of challengers come into the industry, and also as the industry contracts for the first time. So we talked towards the end about how do you do more with less? How do you drive growth within a contracting category, which unfortunately is going to be relevant to some of you listening. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Molly Landman of Petsafe. Molly, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Thrilled to be with you, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. And you are calling in from Tennessee, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yes, Knoxville, Tennessee, what we call East Tennessee.
Amazing. All right, well, let's get into it. So before we talk about everything that you're doing at Petsafe, what you've done over the course of your career, the first question that we ask every guest as a bit of an icebreaker, can you please tell us about a challenger brand that you're particularly passionate about right now and why?
Oh man, I love this question because there are so many challenger brands in the pet tech space these days. And they're coming from both the top end, the more premium brands like Halo and Litter Robot that have really created totally new technology for like white space and consumer occasions to use an automatic litter box in the case of Litter Robot, or a GPS collar that you can take anywhere in the case of Halo, that I think is really, perking up a lot of people's ears in the pet tech space, and making us take note. But then equally on the lower price side, we have a lot of, call it no name, white label, Chinese manufacturers who have popped up as Amazon has become really, really, the number one selling channel. You can't pronounce their name. They're $100 to $150 cheaper than us. In some ways, they look like equivalent products, and they have definitely figured out how to get awesome reviews and a ton of them at launch. So, in this space, you always have to be on your toes and take inspiration from all sides.
Well, I know I mentioned to you in our prep call, while I worked with Del Monte and their pet foods business, we at Rival have not yet worked with. We've had some conversations, but haven't yet worked with a business in the pet food or pet care space. But we have done a little bit of research around the microculture of pet parents, as we call them, or posh pet parents, as Lance likes to say. And one, it's obviously a massive market, a massive industry, and one that's changing really quickly with new entrants, with challenges on the product side, challenges on the marketing side. And I think that probably sets the scene very well to go into the conversation about Petsafe and the playbook that you have started to roll out there. So for people that might not have heard of Petsafe before, can you give us a quick overview on the business, what it does, what it offers, where it's at?
Well, I like to say that PetSafe brand is the biggest pet brand that you've never heard of. I think people listening to this, now that they are aware of the brand, will look around their house, especially if they're pet parents or posh pet parents, will see that they have some of our products. I unknowingly know that I had our best selling Easy Walk harness. My mom uses the Gentle Lead head collar. So many people across the US have invisible fences installed, or wireless fences, automatic litter boxes. We're really a pet tech company that also sells subscriptions, services, and consumables along with it. So think litter, GPS collar subscriptions, batteries, filters for water and feed. And we really exist to make sure that pet parents can live a happy, healthier, and really safer life with their pets. Um, I often say that pets are the new kids and plants are the new pets. And PetSafe Brands is out there to ensure that we can make pet ownership and care and safety of your pets a lot easier so that you can focus on the things that, really matter, playing with your pet and feeling the peace of mind that they're safe. We've been around for over 30 years. Like many founder brands, started with a really unique technology that nobody else was doing. That for us was the invisible fence, like buried wire technology. And with the founder's mindset, have just grown over time with some really cool innovation in our space. So new wireless fence technology for fences, but also through acquisitions. Where in the pet space, there's always an entrepreneur who thinks that they've solved one of their pet peeves, if you will. And over time, we were able to acquire training technology, walking harness technology, and wrap it into what is a really beautiful, like very healthy business for pet safe brands. I think the other thing I'd say about pet safe brands is that we are the number one pet brand on both pure play, so Amazon and Chewy, but also in brick and mortar. And I think that that's a very unique position. A
Yeah.
lot of brands exist in store, they exist online or on D2C. We have very long established relationships. Um, but with that brand and with that presence and heritage comes some baggage, honestly. When I joined, there was a lot of work that we needed to do to refresh the brand, refresh the roadmap, refresh, how we think about our organization and marketing. That's been a really fun challenge, the past 2 to 3 years.
So, PetSafe being the biggest pet brand that people have never heard of, I guess before we get into what you are doing and have done to change that, let's talk a little bit about how it got that way. So, how did PetSafe end up in this place where it's incredibly successful business, product, et cetera, but it's a brand that nobody knows or nobody knew, in part before you got there?
So, I think at the end of the day, consumers really buy benefits and they buy products that make their life easier. And pet safe brands figured that out very early when it came to walking your dog better, keeping them contained and safe, from an oncoming car, in a way that we didn't even have to really establish the brand of the product was just so incredibly great at doing what we said it would, that it opened up a ton of doors for us historically, with retail partners, with vets and trainers who recommended it, and then, online, in Amazon and on Chewy, call it, you know, a couple of years before, COVID. So, there wasn't really a need to make it look really slick, to have a brand that spoke to people on an emotionally resonant way, to advertise, to, what we call top of funnel, to really bring in, unaware consumers, because we had awesome products, and in many ways, we had a technological moat that made us kind of like the only player in town. Now, obviously, things really changed when China got really good at making small electronic goods. When 3P just in general became like a much more accessible channel for a lot of people who wanted to start a brand. Distribution, right, via D2C became very easy. And awareness via social media, particularly in an organic world, was free. Those are obviously, trends that impacted a ton of brands. I come from the consumer world, and we at Unilever, where I worked for about 10 years, faced this challenge, call it like 2010, 2012, 2014. It just took a little bit longer for it to come to electronics, durables, like bigger tickets, like harder to produce items. But a lot of those barriers to entry have really, been decimated. So we needed to go back to what made us really amazing, but also building what consumers knew about us in terms of that emotional connection. We just hadn't been talking about it, and we hadn't been telling, people who might not be considering entering into some of our categories.
So when you got there, when you took the job 2.5 years ago, whatever it was, what did marketing look like in this biggest pet brand that nobody has ever heard of? Where, let's say, the way that I like to think about it, maybe the marketing muscle wasn't all that developed, but what was kind of the state of the landscape when you arrived? And then obviously we're going to talk about what you've built and how you've developed and grown that muscle since then.
So there was no chief marketing officer before I joined. It was a pretty siloed and bifurcated team. Some people doing innovation and P&L on the marketing side, insights really in its own silo, and then other people doing creative and call it like paid media. And there was very little focus, as I mentioned, on brand. And there was a lot of focus on performance marketing, really bottom of the funnel in channels where you could measure. So retail media, particularly Amazon. So bringing all of these functions together under one marketing leader was a big change. It allowed us to start at the beginning, right? What are consumer insights telling us? What does that mean for unmet needs? How do we develop a roadmap that meets those consumers' needs through new products? And then bringing creative, brand, and paid media alongside so that we could develop campaigns across the funnel that reached consumers where they were passionate about these products and finding solutions. Um, it's also, though, meant building a couple of different muscles. So the insights muscle is something that, was previously all about testing products in consumers' homes and making sure they worked. Now we have a world where every 6 months we're measuring brand awareness, key brand attributes across a various demographic metrics. We are going into consumers' homes and understanding, like, really how are they using plain litter boxes, automatic litter boxes. What are their gaps? What are their pain points? What are their triggers? How do they discover us so that we can inform not just the innovation pipeline, but also our marketing campaigns? And so that's been a big transformation. And then really building the creative team to bring to life, right, what the human truth is, the tension, and then our unique solve through claims, through video, through static. I think we did a good job initially on static. Video has been a little bit harder to crack, and we're still really building that claims, that superiority claims muscle. And then the last marketing muscle I would say that we're building is how do we get our marketing strategy right across the funnel, making sure that we have sufficient bottom of funnel, right? So that we're not losing people at that last mile, but also convincing people in the right places, be that middle of funnel or top of funnel, and in an efficient and incremental, like POS way that we are the brand for them. And that actually has been one of our hardest nuts to crack. I think a lot of people struggle between performance and brand marketing, and we're still figuring that out.
I know that that is a topic that is top of mind for probably 80% of people listening. And the other 20%, I'm sure it has been in the recent past. Any tips, tricks, advice to share from your experience, either in what you've done at PetSafe or obviously over the course of your career?
Well, I think it's really important to understand the consumer journey first. Like, where are people first thinking about the brand, discovering brand, and then ultimately purchasing the brand? You know, again, to reference my old world, we had, for brands like Tresemme and Dove and Swab, we had 100% distribution on shelves. Like any Target, any drugstore, you would see our brands. And also, we had a huge brand awareness. So, top of funnel in linear TV, streaming TV, paid social, it was really a remind function to people because they were purchasing our products every month. They knew where to find it. And in some way, it was just a much easier job, right? Of course, then making sure that we were relevant, making sure that we were authentic and we were, kind of like cool was the big challenge there. For pet safe brands, we have less of a footprint in Target and Walmart. We're building our Walmart distribution. And that's where a ton of consumers are. We have a very nice footprint in pet specialty, so-called like Petco, PetSmart, but that is a smaller subset of consumer. And quite frankly, traffic is declining in those channels. Our real awareness, our real, like shelf is on Amazon. And so getting the mix of middle and top of funnel right for less distribution and, a little bit more quiet distribution where people have to search for you has been challenging. And so we found that when we went like purely up funnel, um, we had a very hard time, even with really strong KPIs, A/B testing, weekly, monthly optimization meetings. We had a hard time convincing ourselves and really like the rest of the business that it was driving incremental growth. So what we did is we've gone down funnel a little bit more, and so we're in more middle of funnel, um, and we've spent a lot less. And so we've done a lot more targeted testing, to understand creative difference, audience differences, geo-targeted differences, to really try to prove out the model. But it's still a challenge, I'm not gonna lie.
Hey everyone, just another quick interruption. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not already part of our AMP community on WhatsApp, would love for you to get involved. So AMP is a community that we started at the beginning of the business, really, just to kind of bring together some of the interesting people that we were talking to, the marketers that we were coming across, many of whom have been on this show as well. And so now AMP is about 300 senior marketers from around the world, from various categories, different stages, challengers, incumbents. And it's really a place where people can share questions, can share resources, can make new connections, can use folks as sounding boards. And for those that are in it, it is a very vibrant community. It's really taken on a life of its own, which is amazing. So if you're listening to this and you want to get involved, please go to our website, wearerival.com. There you can find the application form or reach out to me or someone at Rival directly. Thanks so much.
Do you, I have a lot of questions based on that, because I think that it is something, certainly with anybody who's B2C and definitely within the world of consumer packaged goods and retail, it's the same battleground that everybody's on right now. What I'm hearing, but correct me if I'm wrong, obviously coming from the big brand CPG Unilever world is a lot of the kind of like Byron Sharp, distribution, mental and physical availability, distinctive brand assets type thing. And I'd be curious, you mentioned it briefly in the beginning, and I think it is interesting because I know that where we entered this conversation was, hey, the biggest brand that you've never heard of. But actually what I'm hearing is that you tested like, hey, maybe we should go to the top. Maybe we should really promote the brand, but actually have netted out in a very analytical way. It sounds like that actually we're okay to leave that space for now. So I guess my question is, one, any reaction to that if I'm picking it up in the right way? And then two, when it comes to a lot of what we're seeing, which I know we talked about on our prep call, is kind of the importance of, but also the success of challenger brands in building relevance specifically as a driver of purchase within categories. So, how does kind of relevance factor in? And I'd just be curious for you to unpack a little bit more how you decided that the top of the funnel wasn't kind of a battle that you needed to win right now.
So, I think that those are good insights, and I think that there are a couple of questions there that I'll try to address. So the first is, um, we really wanted and get a ton of enterprise support to go top of funnel. I think we all knew it was a pivot we needed to make. And we knew that we were, building new muscles, testing, and we did give it some time to succeed. We just didn't meet our top line KPIs. And when you invest a lot and you don't get growth, there's obviously like a bottom line impact. And at some point, you have to kind of call it, to be totally honest, in order to
Yeah.
like preserve the P&L. So, what we decided though was that in a lot of the categories where we were overly investing in top of funnel, so it's around the containment world, in the automatic litter box world, we had competitors who are, they're VC backed. They have way less profit constraints than we did. They were spending a ton of money to drive awareness for their brands, sure, but also for the category. And so that was a tailwind that we could ride. And we have actually really good brand awareness within the pet hard goods world. It's not, the 90% that I'm used to in consumables. We're more call it like in the low 40s, but versus our competition, we're have the best awareness. We have the best consideration, right, when you're entering into a category unaided. And once they do research, we have the best kind of call it like aided consideration and very strong trial and strong loyalty. So we felt like we could ride some of these other competitors' top of funnel coattails, and that was actually a more efficient way for us to grow. The other thing I'll say though is that the pet durables world is actually challenging. So it turned negative for the first time last year. We've always experienced growth. So I think it's kind of a double whammy when you're not seeing your own POS and you're in a like very challenged category to keep spending. So that was really, a very like collaborative effort that we took. And I'm really proud of the team because we pivoted and we've tried a lot. So I,
Yeah.
I think that answers your first question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think, what you were saying, if you had a lot of kind of buy-in from the top to do more brand work, I think a lot of people listening would love to be in that situation. But I think what I'm getting and what I really appreciate and I'm passionate about is marketing, not marketing for the sake of marketing. And this is, I hear this a lot interviewing people that come from big CPG, because I think that if you're a marketer within
Mhm.
Unilever, a brand manager is a P&L
Yes.
owner. You have the commercial results of which marketing is one. And when we say marketing, it's like the pricing and the promotion and all that stuff. That's just one part of it. But I think a lot of marketers and I think a lot of folks in this industry, when given that opportunity and the support to do the top of the funnel brand work, because let's be honest, sometimes that's more exciting, that's more sexy. You win the awards, you get invited to speak, whatever. But you made the decision in a very informed way to say this is not delivering the results that we expected. Therefore, we're going to shift to what actually is, which I think is great. Sorry, I jumped in there. Were you
No,
going to talk a little bit more about the
I
relevance
was gonna
piece as
get there,
well?
but I think it's an important
Yeah.
just as the CMO, and it's really a general management role, we had to do a lot
Right.
of work on our P&L before we got ready to go top of funnel, right? So there was a ton of like gross margin optimization that we had to do. There was pricing work so that we could free up the dollars to spend and test. And I think that that's something that's really an incredible, like, tool and training ground that you learn in CPG, as brand management, and that was also a skill and a muscle that, like, the organization, right, also needed to learn. So I think it's a great point. In terms of relevance, we operate, call it, in about 7 different categories. We have fences, we have automatic litter boxes, we have training collars, we have behavior, like harnesses and leads, we have water and feed, we have outdoor adventure. And so it's really important that for each of these categories, we understand for our brands, and we have 4 different brands. We have PetSafe, we have Sport Dog, we have Premier Pet, and we have Kurgo. So there's a lot of matrices, right? But for each of those cells, who is our target consumer? What are their primary concerns or triggers, their barriers? And then for the product that we're launching, who really are we talking to and what are we saying? And so I'll give an example for some new automatic litter boxes that we're launching. We did a lot of work to understand that target consumer and really being razor sharp that this was someone who had previously been buying just like a basic litter pan, a $30, PetMate litter pan, and was just really fed up with scooping, truly, in the smell, and wanted to trade up to something that was 200 to 300 to $400. And so we identified for that consumer the life moments and the pain moments that would drive that purchase. So was it a busy professional, right, who was not at their house a lot and didn't want to think about it? Was it the working mom? We call it the focus families, and we have personas for all of these people. Was it the couple that was always fighting over it? And really broke call it like into like 4 or 5 different personas, who we were targeting, have unique influencers, unique messages, unique creative, that we talk to those people with. And when we do have a little bit more of like call it like a macro influencer or a celebrity, we make sure that they speak to our overall target audience and can speak to a couple of those different moments of those unique you might call them subcultures or personas. I think it's probably not detailed enough for you guys at Rival to call them subcultures, but to really make sure that we're talking to them in ways that they, uniquely understand when they think about where they want to trade up.
Hey everyone, just wanted to take a second to make sure that you knew about another podcast that we have here at Rival that's all about microcultures. Many of you have probably seen our white paper that came out recently about how challenger brands are tapping into and leveraging microcultures to drive differentiated category growth. Our Chief Strategy Officer, Lance, and our principal of strategy, Cecilia, host a fantastic podcast called Ripples, where they explore this whole world of microcultures, including speaking to guests from some of the brands that are doing it well. So you should definitely check it out. There's going to be a link in the show notes. You can find it on wearerival.com as well. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and showing up in communities and conversations that are relevant to them and drive perception and behavior like we all do. And that's really the key insight. And folks listening will have heard me talk about this a lot to kind of the microcultures research. Is just that cultural influence has been fragmented in the same way that society has. And a lot of that has moved online, not all of it, of course. Relevance has always been a key driver of commercial growth for businesses. The brands that are seen as more relevant grow faster than those that aren't. But how you plug into that, we think, is different and requires a different approach. But what I like about, and what I want to draw out just for people listening and underline it from what you're talking about, is the way that you're talking about the research and shaping up the audiences that you want to go after is functional, but it's not functional related to the reasons to buy for the product. It's functional related to the needs and the job to be done that these people have in their lives. So really understanding, and people would have heard me talk about the jobs to be done theory a lot, having come from, a product background over the last few years. But that's really what it's all about, is like, what are those specific jobs that are functional in some ways, but also largely emotional?
Sure.
And that's also where I think the opportunity for cultural relevance comes in, when there is the emotional component to how people make these purchase decisions.
Eric, I love that you're
Um,
talking about jobs
yeah,
to be done. That was another new practice that I introduced when I came to PetSafe brands.
yeah,
And I always think about it, get who to do what by doing X. And so it's, the target audience, what you want them to do and how. And I think the marriage of the target audience, and obviously like you want them to buy your product or you want them to think differently about it, but it's really on the buy that, by convincing them that, we have a new litter box that's coming out that's called Open Sky. It's a really unique open top that's great for cats that are scared of enclosed litter boxes or really big cats. And that buy piece of telling them how we're unique, how we're going to meet those unmet needs, there's just such rich territory. And then talking about then, so like, what do they get when, we convince them if we do our job. So I'm a job to be done
Yeah.
convert. I
Yeah.
think some
And
of
I,
my team might
and
get
I just
annoyed.
think I think so much of we actually had one of the Bob Mesta, who's one of the original kind of architects, along with Clayton Christensen of Jobs to Be Done Theory, on the podcast, one of the earlier episodes. Send that to you. He's a fascinating guy. But I do think that a lot of what we talk about, what we focus on as an industry, is about, the story that you tell as a brand, the creative, the campaign, the placement of it, the channels and all that stuff. But actually underpinning all of that, and if differentiation is what drives disproportionate growth, that has to come through the full stack of how you approach and deliver marketing, starting with the insight around the consumer. And so actually, I think, and we believe that a lot of great brands, of course, there's great, creative and execution to how they actually build and develop and deploy these campaigns. But a lot of it starts with a differentiated insight or a differentiated approach to how they actually understand the needs of the customer to then be able to tell the right story in the right way at the right time
Totally.
to be able to deliver it. But I was smiling as you were saying the get to buy piece, because you just reminded me of someone I know pretty well. I've had a lot of conversations in a very similar way. I got to connect you to, because I think you'll really get on. I was actually talking to her last week, and I thought of her because she was at J&J for a long time, so similar CPG background. And then she went and took a CEO role at Thinx,
I
the
love
period underwear
things.
company. Okay, I got to connect you with her. She now just took over as CEO of Dr. Scholl's, has a really interesting challenge and opportunity with that business as well. But anyway, what I was going to bring her up earlier, because when you were talking about riding the coattails of the category, that's one of the things that she realized when she was at Thinx, is they were relatively early on and were a big part of kind of growing the category that now has a lot of other competitors in
Yes.
it. And I was going to draw that out earlier, and since I've now come back around, bringing up Megan Davis, I'll just say that and draw that out. I think that's really interesting, particularly for challenger brands listening, is what else is going on in the category, and how can you ride the coattails so that you don't have to build it if other people are. You just need to define what your point of difference and what your lane
Yeah.
is within it. I know it's not that black and white, but that was one of the things I took away and was kind of digesting as you were talking about that
Well,
earlier.
I think, and Thinx is a good example. Period underwear is obviously very different from automatic litter boxes, but I think the similarity is that both of these products require behavior change. You've got to leave your, tampons behind and go to, Thinx underwear. You have to leave your, like scooping, bad smelling litter pan behind. And if someone is building awareness of a product that supports that behavior change for you, you can kind of slide in with a differentiated message. And sometimes it's not actually even a differentiated message. Sometimes it's a better design at a better price, right? Like sometimes it is a
Yeah.
different brand point of view. I think that there's a lot to differentiation. Um, but it allows you to kind of sneak in there in a cheaper way.
Yep, for sure. Okay, I know that we went off on a bit of a tangent, but I think it was a really relevant and interesting one. So bringing us back, and you actually teed me up to go nicely, segue nicely into the final chapter, and I did not take it, but I'm going to take it now. You mentioned that this was the first time that the category has declined. And we wanted to give a little bit of space to talk about something that I think a lot of marketers are tackling right now, which is when you are faced with limited or negative growth of the market, general economic conditions, supply chain. Don't know how much that affects you. Don't necessarily need to go into it. But when you need to do more with less, how do you approach that? Would love to just get your thoughts from how you're approaching it, driving growth in a declining category, et cetera.
So even when consumers are scared because of inflation, right, as they were last year, or now tariffs, and their wallet seizes up a little bit, they're still spending money somewhere. And in your categories, there are still winners. There are winning brands, there are winning products, there are winning channels. And so we had a very clear strategy that we put in place at the beginning of 2023 and how we were going to win with category, with brands, and that, kind of like worked for us financially, but also with the consumer. And I think what we realized is that at the end of the day, a dollar is a dollar, and where there's growth, and you need to go there. So I think that there always are pockets, even in declining markets, where you can be successful. I also think you have to be really nimble, in those moments. So, owning a P&L is both a blessing and a curse, but you have a lot of levers that you can pull. Price, like how innovative you are, right? And how much you're paying right now to have R&D, that, you want to cancel because you want to focus on, certain types of marketing that you just don't want to invest in at that time. You want to drop it to the bottom line. You do have a lot of options. And then I think the other thing I'll say is that relevance in those markets just becomes really important. So understanding what else your consumer is buying, where their other pain points are, then how you can be the most attractive when their basket is shrinking. Those are all things that you can really have control over.
Hey everyone, just want to take a quick minute because we've actually heard from many of you that you want to get a better understanding of what it is that we actually do here at Rival. You know us for the content. Obviously, you're listening to Scratch right now, but everything else that we put out, the events, the community, but actually our core business, just so you know, we are a marketing consultancy for challenger brands. We partner with brands big and small to gain category share with a challenger approach. We develop and execute strategies and campaigns across 4 main areas of the marketing function: brand strategy, creative and production, paid media planning and buying, and customer data and MarTech. And then, of course, as you know, the mission that's wrapped around Rival is to understand and share our learnings about what drives the growth of successful challenger brands. That's it. Sorry for the interruption. I'll let you get back to the show.
Yeah. And a lot of it, and I know that we wrote it in the brief, but we didn't talk about it explicitly, but hopefully people are synthesizing it from how you're answering these questions. I certainly am. A lot of it is just the basics. It's the fundamentals done really well. And when it gets harder, when, the budgets might be a little bit more constrained, and of course, that's the whole world that we study of challenger brands. That's ultimately what it comes down to. If you can't outspend the category, you need to find different ways to engineer outsized impact with every dollar and every hour that you put into marketing. And oftentimes the answer is not necessarily, although it can be part of it and something new and different that you haven't thought of, haven't tried. A lot of it is really getting back to basics about how do you connect the value prop of the product to the needs that exist in the market in a differentiated way.
Yes, and I also think that when kind of like the macro climate is retrenching a little bit, being a more established brand is actually helpful. You
Yeah.
have, years of reliability, you have strong customer service. It's a little bit less of a risk for consumers. So I think you can also use that to your advantage.
So I have a curveball question, and then we can go into the lightning round. I'm curious if you're up for sharing. You mentioned at the very beginning that I think so there was not a CMO role at Petsafe when you joined. And I'm always curious about those opportunities. I took one, granted on a much smaller scale, at a fintech business here in London. And on the one hand, there's a ton of opportunity, as there clearly was and has been, and that you've delivered at Petsafe. On the other hand, it can be a little bit risky because oftentimes not having a CMO role can be reflective of how the organization thinks about the role of marketing. Is there anything, I'd just be curious, like your thought process, whether any of that resonates, if that was kind of a factor in your consideration, and how did you know that it was going to be the opportunity that it's become, and an organization that, even though they didn't have a CMO, was willing to really back what you wanted to do?
So it's definitely a risk, but I think that there were a couple of beige flags, right, that helped me understand that it was going to be a good fit. So the first was that I think there was an acknowledgement within the organization that the way it was before I joined wasn't working. It felt siloed. It didn't feel like the outcomes were being delivered. And so there was a willingness for something new and change. And that was really positive sentiment and momentum. And then the other was that the CEO who hired me, this was absolutely his vision. and what he knew the company needed. So there was a ton of, I would call it like top and bottom support that made it easier. Now, the harder thing was that what we talked about at the beginning. You could want something, but building the skills and the capabilities to deliver it and the patience for some of these marketing efforts to pay off, that was harder. It took longer to build, but it definitely comes.
Amazing. Thank you for indulging me on that. I just think it's one of the things I think about all the time. I think that as a CMO or senior marketer, you have to choose the organization as much as they choose
Yes.
you. There's a job to be done for you
Mhm.
in within an organization of like what you actually want to deliver, and just really kicking the tires, especially at this level, to make sure it's the right opportunity with amongst those beige flags, is really important. Okay, Molly, I know that we're almost up on time, and I want to be conscious and respectful of your time. So let's round things out with a few quick lightning round
Love it.
questions. Can you please tell us the first marketing job that you ever had?
So my first real marketing job was, after college. I worked for L'Oreal, as a brand manager, but I really think my first marketing job was when I was in 3rd grade. And, in the US, we have these they're like, mini cities where you go, and you have a job, and I think that I was the banker. And, I was responsible, like, the grocery store people would bring me their checks, and I was responsible for getting it into the bank and putting it into a check. Well, I went on my lunch break as a 3rd grader, and I threw away everyone's checks. And the whole town was gonna go bankrupt because I made a mistake. So I literally had to think super fast about how it was gonna save the business, which was the town, and how I was gonna raise money and market it. So I decided to have a in the park, like, ring toss that everybody paid $5 to get into, and I went around to all of the stores, and I told everybody about it. It was word of mouth. It was a cool idea. It was a community inclusion, and I ended up raising all of the money back. I think that that was probably my first real marketing job. But I kinda joke, like, I think as people, we're constantly marketing ourselves, our
Yep.
family, our community, and so there was something about that, that just kind of stayed with me even before I had my first formal marketing job.
That might be the best answer that we've had to that question. So I love it. All right. What is the best piece of career advice that you've ever
Ooh,
received?
this is a good one. So, one of my old bosses and mentors at Unilever told me that what makes you unique is your superpower. And it's really always stuck with me. I think when you go to these organizations, I mean, like L'Oreal is so different than Unilever, that's so different than Bloomingdale's. You have a tendency to want to fit in, but it's a little bit like having a differentiated product. And this goes back to always marketing
Hmm.
yourself. What is special about you, no one else can deliver, and like you will uniquely add value because of that and really do not change.
That wasn't Dean, was it?
It was actually someone who worked for Dean. My
Okay.
friend,
I feel like I've heard that one. Oh,
well,
yeah,
so it was my
I've heard
friend
that from
Piyush
him
Jain, so
before.
maybe he got it from Dean. 2 people that I really like
What
and admire.
is what is the best brand campaign that you've seen
Ooh,
recently?
so, Printemps, the French department store, just opened in downtown Manhattan, and I went to visit it a couple of weeks ago. First of all, it's gorgeous, but I think a couple of, like, really interesting things that they did in terms of, 1, their product, and 2, of how they got the word out. So, the product, I mean, department stores, I mean, look at, like, Saks, look at Betteridge, like, it's in many ways a dying business because people can just go online to order with ease and convenience, but Printemps is all about being in the store and having experiences, particularly through hospitality, food, wine, clienteling, unique vintage items. And it was just so it was like no department store I've ever been to, and, like, you could just literally get lost in there for hours, in, like, one little champagne section in the dress department. Um, so I think that the product is really interesting, but then the way that they marketed it is they recruited a ton of Substack users, like Substack writers, I guess, and had them to the pre-opening, and then talked to their micro audience of 50-ish thousand people. And as someone who I'm a devoted Substack reader for probably about like 10 different people, I just thought that it really spoke to the moment and of a lot of the subcultures that people are delving into. I thought it was really smart.
I love that. We're going to have to check that out. And last question, most important question. What is one thing people should do differently after listening to this episode?
I think that for so many people, um, confidence is the unlock to everything in the world. And I think that there's just there's a propensity to want to compare, whether that's to other people in your organization, other brands that are out there, and just really getting deep, knowing yourself, knowing your brand, knowing your consumer, and having conviction that what you're doing on behalf of those different constituents will win out. I think will just give a lot of people confidence. It'll take them a long way.
Have more courage in your convictions is feedback, really helpful feedback that I've gotten
Mm.
over the course of my career. So I love
It's
that.
like,
All right, Molly, going to let you go. This has been great. Really appreciate it.
thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.